Jacob wrestling the angel on the cover, and so I had hunted all through artwork all over the place, and all I could find were pictures of Jacob being defeated by this great big angel, and I didn't feel like that was what I was doing here. I felt like I was, engaging God, not quite equal basis, but at least I was standing up to God and having a real match. So I wanted something conceptual that would show up well on Amazon, so it would be a nice contrasting cover. And so the designer and I worked on that, and this was her idea. So the two opposing chairs, there's faith and doubt, so there's a certain amount of tension there between faith and doubt, and I go back and forth between them. So that's the idea. And yet I find this to be sort of an embracing image. I feel very, welcomed and pulled in by it, so I like it. And it's my favorite color, they're red. So. Yes.
What commonalities or blatant differences, opposing point of views, did you find between the different religious beliefs?
That I take that question up in here, and I'm going to quote Houston Smith here, and a man named Syed Hussein Nasser, who's a Muslim scholar, and they're sort of theirs is what's called a perennial philosophy. And this is kind of where I land because I have so many different people here, and I believe them all. I'm sitting with the Jew, and I think I'm Jewish. I'm sitting with the Mormon, I think I'm Mormon. And when I'm sitting with the Christian scientist, I leave there and I'm ready to tear up my Medicaid card. So the comment. So I think I'll stick with what Nasser said at one point. The expressions of the revelations are all different, and they seem very contradictory often, but they all meet in one point, which would be the ultimate reality, or the Godhead is the word that would be used. So what I found in sitting with people is that there was this very loving feeling with all of them. They all took life very seriously and took me very seriously, and were loving people. So, and I think of God as loving. So maybe I was projecting, but the differences to me, although they seem different in fact, Christians believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and the Jews and the Muslims will say, oh, well, that's sacrilegious. So the various expressions are incompatible in a way, but that doesn't bother me, because to me, what I feel is that God is trying to reach out to human beings in different ways over time. There was a Native American pastor I interviewed when I was at the Times, whose ancestors were Indians, in the Dakotas, I think. And he said, well, I like to feel that God has been with my people all along, that God didn't just arrive when the Westerners arrived with Christianity. So, and people ask that question. People ask that question a lot, because I think people somehow feel a need to reconcile these different religions, and I feel it's okay that we can't necessarily reconcile the tenets of the various different faiths.
But seeking God, that need to seek God, seems to be universal.
Yes.
People then.
Yes, and then when people feel it, it feels like the same God to me. Oh, I meant to point out with these three people that I quoted here, I think it's really interesting that the atheists performed this experiment on God, asked God to lift a pea, and God didn't lift the pea, but when the pastor asked God to move a cloud, God moved the cloud, and then Sister Barbara again has this transcendent experience of God. So some people have that and some people don't. So there are different temperaments. Some people have this wonderful thunderbolt from God, and other people, I never got my thunderbolt. So there are lots of different ways to relate to God, I believe.
So I'm wondering, just thinking about what you just said, do you think it's a difference between the atheist being somewhat skeptical and wanting proof, where the pastor who you just read, he wanted to be disproven? So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, true. Yes, I think one was predisposed to not see the P rise, although he said he half expected it to lift, to rise, to hover. The atheist, you see, he has this wonderful sense of being alive. So he says he doesn't believe in God, but he actually uses the word, he thinks that the world is miraculous. That just being alive it's a miracle that we are here together, talking to each other in this moment. So he's got a spiritual side that is expressed in a different way, without, needing to have this demonstration of God's existence. So, I think people probably, people have different temperaments. I do think that.
What's your name?
Also, I think that it makes a difference in terms of what their growing up experience is like, what their families are like, what they do in terms of practicing or not practicing any kind of religion. That has a profound influence on children.
Well, the atheist mother was a, I think it's Vedanta. So she had sort of a, and his father, I think, was an atheist. So, yes.
Barbara, how are you?
I thought the Robert just looked at it, whoa.
Or former pastor.
Yeah.
I've come to check on stories.
What should I say here?
I just want to congratulate you. You've always been uncovering stories. And I remember having a longer beard and a heavier everything. And one day you showed up, well, I shouldn't say one day, it was often every Sunday, mostly. And, and I didn't have a beard.
Oh, yeah.
And you looked at me, and you were in a hurry. You said, "There's a story here, and I'm going to get it." And then all of a sudden, I said, "Oh yeah, well, I'll call you," or something like that, because I wasn't sure why I had taken that beard out, and you made me think about why I did it. I was still stuck in the 60s, as wonderful as a lot of it was, awful stuff too, but it helped me kind of be more, as we say today, transparent. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, that was funny. That was when I was working at the Tribune. So I sort of had a, interest in religion stories even at the Trib. So I managed to find one in Father Rob there.
Oh,
Yeah.
How has the experience of interviewing for this book and then actually writing it changed you?
Well, at the beginning, so I'm going to have to give you the end of the book to tell you that. Or I'd rather you buy the book and read it. At the beginning, I really felt something was missing in my life. That God, that I no longer could believe in God the way I had as a child, and so therefore God was gone, and it was. But then in talking to people, and I addressed several different obstacles to faith, and one was, why don't I have a Thunderbolt? And so I finally, there was a man named Rene Laurentine, I think his name was, and he was a Mariologist, and he'd go and study people who were having experiences of visions of Mary, for having apparitions of Mary. And so he'd come and he'd study and he'd investigate and he'd talk to people and interview people, and sometimes there would even be EKGs done or whatever, or EEGs done, just to see what was up with these people. So, and I once asked him, well, wouldn't you like to have, to see Mary yourself and have an apparition like these folks? He said, no, actually, he liked doing what he was doing, and if he had an apparition, then he wouldn't be able to do this work anymore. So I thought, oh, that's me. I like talking to people and hearing their stories and putting them on paper. So maybe I'm just not the Thunderbolt type. And so I felt comfortable with that. Another issue that I addressed was, the problem of evil, which is how can a good God who's all-powerful and all-knowing permit people to suffer? And I had several people talking about this. There was a Zoroastrian priest, a young man I'd interviewed, And he said, well, you know, God doesn't do evil. There's another force for evil. There's God who's the force for good, and then there's the force for evil. And in the end, humanity will help God to overcome the force for evil. So God is not evil and doesn't allow evil, but so you can see, so God is not totally all powerful, although in the end he will be. Let's see, there are a couple other people weighed in on that, but the person who, a Congregationalist minister who'd had experienced a stillbirth and followed by 2 miscarriages, you know, we concluded finally, well, maybe God is not good. Maybe God actually does wreak painful stuff on people for who knows why. So that addressing the problem of evil is, and then the witch finally is the one who helped me with that. She said, you know, well, we can't really know God. God is beyond our understanding, and God's sense of justice may be different from ours. And we may not understand God, but that doesn't mean we can't love God. So these various issues that were kind of obstacles to faith for me were kind of set aside. But in the end, there was a Buddhist who did this 650-mile bowing pilgrimage. So 3 steps in a bow, 3 steps in a bow. And he said it's all about ego, about relinquishing your ego. And so I finally thought, oh, I see. Something in me wants to know for sure what God is like. And maybe I need to let go of that and just be in the world and appreciate it the way the atheist does. So here we are. In this moment, you and I are standing here talking. That's a miracle that we're here, right? So to be able to just feel that way about life. So at the end, I felt, yeah, there's nothing missing from my life. It's been there all along. So now I've told you the end of the book, but I've already bought it. So yes, so I did, but it was a long period of addressing these various issues and putting them aside.
Do you ever meet people that you interviewed who I would describe to as like blind faith? Like they ascribe to a certain religious format and they don't deviate from that. And for example, like the Catholic Church, no birth control, women can't be priests, anti, gay. But yet they call themselves Catholics and, and I can't call it blind faith. They never question it. Why can't women be priests? Did you find in your interviewing all these type of people, how do they come together to have that balance? Or do they really don't question it? They just continue with their lives and that's just acceptance?
I tried to be open to every type of person, including the people who never changed their mind. There's a Mormon who went on his mission trip, and he believed in God at the beginning. He believed in God at the end, even though he wound up on his mission trip, in surgery, and his parents weren't allowed to fly across the country to see him. But he, there was he and I sitting there talking, and there was God again. So.
What's interesting?
I think I probably didn't choose anybody that I thought was so static that they were uninteresting. I've probably met lots of people like that, but then there's the fundamentalist Christian, but he underwent this conversion, and he is so convinced that, he's got it, right now, and he still feels that. I still talk to him, Mark Zappoli, and he still thinks that God is, a certain way, and he's pretty fixed in his political point of view, which I don't share, but I sat with him and I listened to him, and there was God again. So,
well, it's interesting because as I told you, I'm a nurse in emergency room. Like for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe in blood transfusions.
Oh, yeah.
And you may have a child who's in a car accident that needs that, and that's interesting. We can obviously override that, and somehow they were able to accept that as having a blood transfusion as long as the medical people made that decision. But as parents, that they cannot. And also legally, we can, we can go above the parents to do that. It's a life-threatening situation. But yeah, that's always kind of like, I think with religion, my thing going through life is, how far do you go with your faith that you kind of close out every other option,
I'll tell you a story that maybe addresses that for the way I feel about it. I was interviewed by this man named Bob Dutko, who's in Detroit. He's a talk show host, radio talk show host. And after I committed to this interview, I found out that he was a fundamentalist Christian. I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to skewer me. But he was very gracious. But early on, he said, you know, if I could ask God one question, if God granted me the answer to one question, I've decided the question I wanted to answer is, where am I wrong? Because that way I can get the most information from God about whether I'm right or wrong. And later in so that I thought that was telling. And then later in this interview, he said, "No, okay, Barbara, you think that people of many different religions can find salvation or reach God, but I think that the only way to God is Christianity." He said, "Now, and I'm going to pin you down here," because he was trying to be polite. He said, "I'm going to pin you down here. I apologize, but isn't that true? Either you're right or I'm right." And I said, "Well, that's true, but I think God is up there watching this conversation, very amused, and thinking, well, one day they'll both find out the truth." But what I wish I had said to him was, "Bob, why is it so important to you to be right?" And see, that's not important to me. It's not, because I think God is, you know, beyond understanding. So I'm a Christian. I remain a Christian because that's the faith that was given to me, and I'm going to stick with it, and I'll learn from it. And I'll live in that faith. But I don't need to be right and convince anybody else that they're wrong. So I do have trouble with things like the blood transfusions and so on. Yeah, but that's just my personal opinion. So, anyway, this has been a lot of fun for me. You know, we could ask more questions if you want, but maybe people are wanting some coffee or cookies. Okay, Sister
I
Barbara.
want to say one thing, and that is, it doesn't matter what religion you are or what beliefs you have, as long as you're a good person.
Okay,
Doesn't
Catholic
matter.
talking here.
Yeah.
But that's another whole challenge.
You know, people who are, you know, attacking other people because they believe in something that these don't. You know, that has nothing to do with God. As long as you're a good person, that's all that's important.
And that's a challenge enough.
That's
right
hard
there.
enough, right?
Yeah, let alone trying to be right in addition to that.
If I could address a question.
Sure, sure.
Was it a difficult decision for you to change pathways or to change gears? It doesn't sound like you really left your calling, but you left the pathway.
I left one expression of it to join another expression.
Yes.
And yes, it was difficult because I could see how this could have fit into what I already belonged to, but they couldn't see it. And, you know, I was 25 years in the holiness community, but their focus is teaching. And I, at that point, was much more interested in contemplative prayer and what I had learned from John Main and, you know, the World Community for Christian Meditation and that kind of thing. So, yeah, in the book, I think it says it felt like getting a divorce. You know, it wasn't easy. But I tried everything to stay, and it just didn't work. And nobody was telling me not to try it. And I talked to all kinds of people who would have said, "You're crazy." You know?
And how do you feel about it now?
Oh, I'm delighted. It's wonderful. You know, because our priority is to come together and sit down together and listen to God. It's a real gift.
Wonderful.
And we need it. I tell people all the time, you know, I teach people how to sit down and be quiet. And they say, "Oh, I want to learn how to do that." But, you know, do they make the time to do it? That's the problem. You know.
How is your relative is that from Quakers? Because they practice the same.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know that much about Quakers, except somebody told me that they do share a lot when they come together.
Not necessarily a lot,
Well, I don't know.
just if the Spirit moves them to
Yeah,
share.
no, we don't do that. We just have 20 minutes of quiet. Yeah, but then we have other opportunities for interacting, so. Yeah, you're welcome.
I just have one comment where you question things like being in a faith with rules that maybe you don't agree with, but you just said something, you don't always have to be right. And so maybe the people that started the beliefs, whether they're right or wrong. And maybe I don't have to be right, and I don't have to sit in a judgment, so therefore I can let things be and still be within my faith and keep it, if you understand. I don't have to be right, and I'm just not sure about everything, but it doesn't matter, because the overall essence of being alive and in a wonderful world, that is good. And so I stay within my faith, and nothing's exactly the way anybody wants it to be, I don't think. So that's my feeling.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This is lovely. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you.
You need to sign books or chat some more.